All right, finally, you are looking live. All right, time to roll. World War II. What's the last thing you got in your notes? Because you guys are on, my two classes are on two different places. What was it? Oh, okay. So we finished that slide. We've been through the turning point in the Pacific theater. What's the turning point in the Pacific theater of the war? It's not the end of the Pacific War. We're going to go back to it because what was it that General MacArthur said when he had to leave the Philippines? So we'll go back to the Pacific. But what's the turning point, Dina, in that war in the Pacific? The Japanese had almost established total dominance. The Battle of? Yeah. So this is a quick review of everything we did yesterday. Really, I hope I highlighted it enough that the Bataan Death March will be something that you never forget. Not that you should harbor, like the people I know that are older in their 80s, that harbor a lot of bitterness still 80 years later, but it's something that is maybe, why do we study history? So after World War II, the nations of the world reconvened. We're going to learn that they formed this thing you all know of called the UN, United Nations, and they meet in this neutral. There's a country in Europe that's known for being historically neutral, right in the middle of Europe, called Switzerland. So there's a city in Switzerland that the countries get together and they discuss things like, should there be rules of engagement for war? You may have heard the phrase "all is fair in love and war," or whatever that means, but there are rules for fair play when it comes to war. And after what happened with our prisoners of war in Japan and all the things that happened with Germany, they had to figure out, hey, there is going to be such thing as war for some reason. We don't want there to ever be war, but if there is, there have to be rules that the whole international community agrees on, that you can't do that. You can't use chemical weapons. You can't treat people. You can't torture people. Even to the point where you take a prisoner of war, they have to be treated humanely. And certainly in Bataan, they weren't. The losses by the Japanese were, as you can see, significantly more in the Battle of Midway, which stopped their desire for total dominance in the Pacific. So we're going from there. We're going to go back there. We're going from the Pacific back to not quite Europe yet. We're going to Northern Africa. Why? What country wanted to establish themselves as build their empire? And the first place they went to was into Africa to find a place that they could say, all right, this is the beginning of us establishing ourselves, not just as this country, but worldwide. Italy. So Italy, once the war starts, they're going to try to establish more dominance in Africa. They're going to try to make their influence all over Northern Africa. By the way, what do we call that part of Africa? There's a specific geographic term that describes the whole Northern Africa. It's dominated by one specific geographic entity. What? I said it's one of the most famous geographic areas of the world. Go ahead. Here, you'll get it after this hint. Often people will say that this is the largest of these geographic entities, but then you have to remind them that the Antarctica is actually the largest. I see a need to get then. The Sahara Desert, right? So this is called the Desert War and Italian Campaign. We're going to put these two together because it's Italy that wants to dominate in the desert. What desert? The Sahara Desert. Where's that? Northern Africa. And when you talk about the geography of Africa, there's a term called sub-Sahara. That tells everybody that you're talking about these countries, nations that are from Central down to South Africa, because Northern Africa is basically desert. And again, Italy is the country that's trying to expand there. Of course, Italy is on the side of the Allies or Axis powers. Axis powers, right? They're on the side of the Nazis, the Germans. So whatever Italy's doing, they're going to be getting help from Germany. Of course, Germany's got their own problem, right? They've had all the success in Germany, but and Europe, but they are not quite. They haven't conquered Great Britain. They got stalled in Russia. But of course, if Italy needs help, they're going to have to help because they're allies, just as Italy's helping with their fight on the European mainland. Well, it's February 1941, and as Italy's trying to establish themselves in northern northern Africa, in northern Africa, the Brits go down, and they kind of rather quickly put Italy's dreams to a halt, and they defeat the British. They make them surrender in Libya. Libya is a country right here in northern Africa, and they push them up against the Mediterranean Sea, and they force the Italians to surrender. So game over. No, game's not over. There's going to be a reset, a replay, because while they surrendered, they weren't ready to totally give up, especially the Nazis. So we're entering the scene is going to be one of the most famous military leaders in history. He's definitely probably the most famous military leader in Germany. Does anybody know his name? His name is again, he's one of the most famous and maybe more famous for his nickname. His nickname comes from where this battle's taking place. I'm just checking. Maybe somebody's read about it and know who this guy is. His name was Erwin Rommel, and his nickname is just checking, Desert Fox. Even though the British surrendered in early 1941, the battle for Northern Africa is not over, because once Italy has to surrender, reinforcements are coming, and it's the German general, Erwin Rommel. He's going to play a significant role in this part of the war, and then he's also going to be, after this is over, he's going to play a significant role in Germany's battle towards the end of the war. Erwin Rommel, that's why his name is in bold type. His nickname, Desert Fox. So when Ben's watching Jeopardy tonight, question comes up. What is Erwin Rommel's nickname? What is Desert Fox? There's another word up there in italics. That word is Panzer. Panzer is short for, anybody taking German in here? A longer form of the word, but Panzer is short for tank in Germany. It has to do with, it's translated, I don't think the word's military, but vehicle, some military vehicle, artillery vehicle. But the reason it's highlighted is because when you're reading about World War II, you will come across this word a lot. So now you know what it is. Panzer divisions are army or soldiers in the German army, and the dominant vehicle, the dominant tool they use for their invasions is the tank. And the Germans are well known for their tanks. So if you study World War II, there's a big deal made about the ingenuity, the technology, the engineering of the German tanks, and could the American tanks stack up? You know, things I read, most people have the German tanks were really superior to all other countries' attempts at making tanks. So they're called panzers, panzer divisions. And when Rommel goes down there, the British thought they had things settled. They made the Italians surrender. But then comes Rommel. And suddenly the tide turns, and the Germans, the Nazis, the Axis powers are just about ready to establish dominance over the whole Sahara region of North Africa. But then, now entering the scene is going to be another person that becomes very famous in World War II, but he's one of the good guys. In fact, he's going to be president after World War II. His nickname is Ike. Anybody know who this guy's going to be? We're going to talk about him a lot over the next 2 days. He becomes the supreme commander of all the Allied troops eventually. He's one of our greatest generals in American history. His name is Dwight D. Eisenhower. So just as it looks like Germany and the Axis powers are going to take control and eventually win all of the land there in northern Africa, Dwight D. Eisenhower leads Allied troops coming from the west, which would be, of course, the Atlantic coast here. So he arrives, and Allied troops start moving in from the west. On the other side, in the east, you've got the British, and they call him Field Marshal. American generals, British Field Marshal. Their Field Marshal, Monty is his nickname. Montgomery, he's leading their troops from the east. Wow. Sounds like Joe the other night. It's David Easy. I mean, it's true. I'm going to go with my words. It's not like a character. I'm not really saying anything except what is real, true. Field Marshal Montgomery. So by May of 1943, see what happens when you make fun of people? They finally defeat the Desert Fox. And once they defeat the Desert Fox, Churchill, FDR, leaders of the American forces decide, you know what, it's time for us to make the Axis powers start to focus on something other than, they got their troubles in Russia, they got their troubles in Great Britain. We're going to make them start focusing on the southern. We're going to create a southern front. And it's actually what Churchill describes as Europe's soft underbelly. It's probably the easiest access and the easiest avenue we have to gain victory over the Axis powers is by going through Italy. No offense to Italy, but you're really not as strong as Germany. So while German and the Axis powers are focused on their eastern and western fronts, how about if we go from Africa, now that we've established ourselves here, and we start to go up into Europe through the southern part of Europe? Makes sense? Good strategy, right? It should be much easier for us to conquer from the south than it would be where Germany's got most of their attention on the eastern and western front. So that's why Churchill called it soft underbelly. Another quote attributed to Churchill, Jake. I had to sneak that in there. So in the span of, 9 months, the Allies are able to take total control of an island right off the toe. By now, that Italy's that boot-shaped country that sticks out into the Mediterranean, and that island right off the toe of the boot, Sicily. Once the Allies get control of Sicily, now they've got a base to plan their strategy to invade Italy proper. So that's why that's a big deal that they get Sicily. And then, look, we cover a year and a half in 2 lines. In 2 minutes of our study of World War II and U.S. history, we cover a year and a half in 2 lines. Otherwise, like I said, we could spend like a whole semester, a whole year just studying World War II. You can make a life study of it. Some of you have parents and grandparents that that's like their thing. They maybe it's a Civil War, maybe it's World War II, and they read all the time. Even now, they're still learning about World War II or Civil War. The Allies end up from Sicily, going up through the boot into central Italy, and we got the capital. By June 4th of 1944, we have taken Rome. The battle's still not over, though. So they're going to continue, even though they got the capital, the Italians are going to dig in and try to at least salvage the northern part of their country. So that's actually going to go on. This last little note here tells us that, just so you don't think that this battle was over on the southern front, they got Rome, but this is going to go on for another almost year. When it says they didn't reach the Alps, why would I put it that way? Anybody? Why in your notes does it say that the Allies didn't reach the Alps until the spring of 45, right about the end of the war? What's significant about the Alps when it comes to Italy? Okay, but what else? The Mediterranean is the southern border of Italy. What forms the northern border of Italy? The Alps, right? So that's why it's worded like that. You know that when I put that they didn't reach the Alps until spring of 1945, in other words, rather than writing two sentences, boom, put it like that, and you know that they didn't take all of Italy until 1945. Does that make sense? What do you think's next? Anybody that's had any study of World War II, I want you to see that date. By June of 1944, we have taken Rome. So whatever I put up next is kind of like, remember I said the Germans stalled in Russia and we left there on December 5th, 1941. And I said, where do you think we're going to go next? If we ended there on December 5th, 1941, we then went to December 7th, 1941. D-Day. D-Day is June 6th, 1944. June 6, 1944. Not quite a date that will live in infamy. In fact, it's a date that we celebrate. Like, we commemorate December 7th, 1941. We commemorate / celebrate June 6th every year. It's a commemoration because it was a very sad day for a lot of people. It's a celebration because it's the beginning of the end for the Nazis. That makes sense? There's really no reason to celebrate December 7th. I mean, it was just absolute destruction brought by the Japanese. And we didn't want to get into the war. So we just commemorate that. June 6th, D-Day, we don't just commemorate, it's a cause for celebration because it's because of what the men did on this day and the following couple months that led to the final defeat of the Nazis, which means Europe's going to be liberated, first France and then all of Europe. And then what goes into that? So instead of 6 million Jews being killed, we could have had, who knows, how many more Jewish people, eventually black people, eventually Catholic people, eventually non-Aryans would have been killed if we didn't stop the Nazis. Even over a year's time, how many more Jews would have been killed? Who knows, right? So this is the beginning of the end for the Nazis. D-Day, June 6th, 1944. There's that man again, General Eisenhower, Ike, as he became known. I like Ike. Jake has seen that button before. I've seen that button at Jake's house before. You guys know Paul? Paul Walker? Do you know about his collection? Got all those commemorative buttons and stuff. I like Ike became a big, that's like one of the most famous presidential campaign buttons because his nickname was Ike. So after the war, he's going to become, war heroes oftentimes become presidents. Well, he's named after his success in Northern Africa. All of the Allies choose him, not just the leader of the American forces, the AEF, remember that term? AEF, American Expeditionary Forces. He's not only the head of the Americans, he becomes this allied, capital A, capital C, capital S, capital A, capital C, the supreme allied commander. He is commander over all allied troops, British, French, American. He's the top dog. And he's the then mastermind behind this Operation Overlord. D-Day, codenamed Operation Overlord. We are going to send 3 million soldiers and sailors, Army, Navy, Marines, Air Force. By the way, the Air Force is born in World War II. We're going to send 3 million strong Allied forces into one 60-mile stretch in a place called Normandy, France, across the English Channel from Great Britain. Half of the troops are going to be U.S. troops. So Caleb's pretty good at math. He knows that if there was about 3 million troops, 1.5 million of them are American troops. And they're going to, quote unquote, storm the beaches at Normandy, up here in northwestern France. Here's Great Britain, here's the English Channel, and up in this area is Normandy. And it's mostly a surprise attack. Of course, if Germany has control of France, they are going to have the borders of France, they're going to have some forces there, right? But we're hoping, for the most part, that they don't know. They might have, okay, listen, it's war. We're gathering intelligence. We've got spies. They're gathering intelligence. They got spies. So they had an inkling. That's like a clue. They had, hey, they're probably going to try to invade at some point. And if they're going to invade France, it's going to have to be from the sea, because the Germans have the eastern part of France pretty locked down in the northern part. So Operation Overlord is a 60-mile stretch of beaches, which they codenamed Utah, Gold, Sword, Juno, and Omaha. This is probably the most famous one because it's where most of it's had the most forces there. The Nazis were not, of course, as prepared as we were, the ones planning the invasion. The initial of these 3 million on that morning of June 6, 1944, 175,000 are sent to these beaches. The Nazi forces that were there fought fiercely, and we'll find out the results of their fierce resistance. Among the forces that went into Normandy, the idea was you're going to storm the beach, and while you are occupying any German defenses that are trying to stop you from taking over the beachheads, we're also going to be flying planes and dropping bombs, and more than dropping bombs, we're going to be dropping 13,000 paratroopers in behind so that we can have the Germans right there at the beach fighting, and then we can drop our paratroopers behind, and the thought is then maybe we can squeeze them. Does that make sense? Unfortunately, anybody ever seen movies, video, D-Day? 4,000 allies are going to die. 10,000 casualties means 6,000 others are wounded to the point that they are put out of commission. There's something interesting about statistics in history, even as recently as 80 years ago. And again, I say recently because some of you have grandparents that are living that were alive at this time. Right? If your grandparent is in their 80s, or great grandparent, then they were alive at this time. So it wasn't really that long ago, right? And you get some of these statistics. It's kind of embarrassing saying there were 4,000 German casualties at least, but it could have been up to 9,000. Now, how just 80 years ago do we not have a sophisticated enough organization to figure out a more precise number? But the fact is that they don't. First of all, the Americans were probably among the best at trying to be as accurate as possible. And there was no digital, everything wasn't digitized, right? On 9/11, every name gets read every year to commemorate that, right? Throughout history, that wasn't always the case. So, hey, they had at least 4,000 casualties. It could have been up to 9,000. Kind of crazy to think it could be anywhere in between with all the information we can gather today. So, over the next, what is that, June, July, August, 3 months, there's going to be casualties on each side. Normally, I love to sneeze. Not right now. Look how precise the Americans, even back then, we got it down to 125,847. Where the German records, somewhere between 4,000 and 9,000. Over 200,000. Listen, in the summer of 1944, there were 125,847 U.S. soldiers that were killed or severely injured in this one operation to liberate Europe, which in turn then, if Hitler doesn't have control of Europe, then any other future ideas he had of taking over the world are gone. So this isn't just about, and from the American point of view, yeah, we didn't want to get involved in a war over there again, but who knows what would have happened in the future. If you've got this one madman that doesn't just have one country, but has a whole continent, and when I say continent, actually two, because if he takes over Russia, Russia goes all the way to the Pacific Ocean. Russia goes into Asia. I could have easily come to pass in America. Videos. D-Day. Somebody said last period that does anybody know what movie this music's taken from? I would never do it, but my kids, the school they went to, they had to watch Saving Private Ryan. Has anybody ever seen it? Do you know why I had to watch Saving Private Ryan?
Yeah.
Weren't there many times you probably wish you didn't see that? Very graphic, right?
Yeah, but
So I'm not suggesting you watch it. Go ahead. But, from a guy, 10th grade high school guy, sometimes we like watching stuff like that. Go ahead.
I was just saying.
I mean, obviously, it's a very popular movie, right? What? No, but it's one of those movies they would have had to sign a waiver. So I'm not.
Have you not seen it?
I didn't see the whole thing.
You haven't seen it?
I have. I don't want to.
How?
Because I don't want to. Anyway, obviously this isn't a movie. These are real people doing real heroic things. In some ways, movies and video games kind of cheapen psychologically what really happened. HA is a hectare, if you remember that from math. By the way, if you go to battle, who's got the advantage, the highland or the lowland?
High.
Right? So if you've ever seen, they didn't really show good enough footage, even though this is original footage of what they call bluffs. So you enter the beach, and then to get from the beach to the mainland, there's a bluff. I mean, there's a wall they had to scale to get to the top. Imagine being those first, and by the way, we said 175,000, but there weren't 175,000 altogether, right? Those first men, somebody did the math probability of surviving with all of the gunners that the Germans had on the bluffs. Mathematically, with the numbers of men that came on against all of those bullets that would have been raining down, they had like a 1 in 4 chance to survive. Mathematically, 75% of them would have been killed to establish the beachhead. Still, half of them were killed, but mathematically, they had a 1 in 4 chance to survive, but half of them did. And imagine how heroic it would be to be the ones to make it up that bluff with all this fire coming down upon you, and then be able to be the ones to take out the German gunners, so that then they wouldn't be able to continue to just. I mean, picture it. You're up high, they're down low. You're just like picking them off, right? Incredible. And we stand here today, 80 years later, on the shoulders of such giants of men, including some of your grandparents or great-grandparents.
Serious